Well, welcome back to the Choosing None podcast. I'm Laura-Catherine Etheridge.
I'm Camille Bishop.
And we are really glad to be back with you today. We are continuing our journey related to the attributes of God. What is he like? What are his characteristics and attributes? And what are his names? And we've been, as of late, continuing this scripture of Exodus 34, 6 through 7, where the Lord actually describes himself. And we thought that would be a wonderful place to start. And we've journeyed through some of those characteristics of God and his attributes. And we're going to continue that conversation today. So welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be here.
Yeah. I thought I might start just with reading that passage again.
Great idea.
Out of Exodus, and then we can kind of unpack it. So Exodus 34, 6 through 7, it says, "The Lord passed before him," and the him is Moses, "and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting to the iniquities of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation." So over the last few episodes, we've talked about the Lord, and we unpacked that a little bit with the story of Zacchaeus, and then we dove into a God that is merciful and talked about how he was so merciful to that woman who was in a lifestyle that was damaging for her, and he met her with mercy. And so we're headed next to this aspect of him being gracious, and going to spend some time in that today. So what do you think of when you think of that attribute of God?
It's interesting because sometimes it says gracious, sometimes it says compassionate. And that particular characteristic is just so tender. I was listening to a sermon about God's compassion on the drive down here yesterday, and he actually unpacked that word compassion, and he said, in the Greek, kam means with, and then passion means with emotion. So, it's the Lord with emotion. Yeah. In other words, he's not some, unfeeling being out there, in outer space. He is a God who does have emotions. He feels, he cares, he comes close, he has compassion for us, and he's available to us. So that's what I think when I think of the word compassion. Which
is so remarkable. I think, like we've talked about in previous episodes, it's like sometimes God can seem very far off, and we think of him as being inside the cover of our Bible, but to realize, like you've brought up, he's the same God. He's the same God, Old Testament, New Testament. He's the same God now as he was then, and he's this God that feels. He feels deeply to feel about things in our life, and like you say, very deeply.
Yes, and you see that, some people, again, like I talked about before, people kind of separate God and say, well, in the Old Testament, he looks like a very angry, revengeful God, and in the New Testament, he looks like this loving God. But actually, there is no difference. It's the same God, Old Testament, New Testament. It's one continuing story about who this God is. And he names himself. He says, I am gracious, I am compassionate. And there are, as you read the Bible, Old and New Testament, you just see story after story of God's compassion upon his people, even when they didn't deserve it. Yeah. Even when they were disobeying, they said, we don't want anything to do with you. We're going to do things our way. Still, God was compassionate towards them. It's truly amazing.
It is.
I heard someone say on a podcast recently, God is terrifyingly good. I'm like, wow, what a concept. He's terrifyingly good. In other words, he's so good that sometimes it actually terrifies us because he is good, and he wants to help us. Yeah. He wants to change us. He wants to deliver us from, destructive patterns of life. He wants to set us free. He's for us.
Yeah, he really is, and it's like this incredible thing if we stop and we meditate on that how he feels towards us. And I know we'd said it would be neat to unpack a story where we just see that attribute of who he is in motion in Jesus. So we had kind of brainstormed, and there was one that especially had come to mind for you that we thought we'd spend some time in. So what caught you about this story?
Yes, this is the story out of Luke chapter 7 about Jesus, helping a widow whose only son had died. And I had read about it, I don't know, a number of weeks ago, and the story just struck me at how compassionate and kind Jesus was to this woman. As I was preparing for, this podcast session, I was listening to a sermon about this particular story, and it really helped me to even unpack it further. And so what struck me was how Jesus was moved by her situation and how painful it was for her. So I'd love to just read that passage. And so this is out of the Gospel of Luke, and it is chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. And it says, "Soon afterward, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a great crowd went with him." So Jesus was not alone. Jesus was with people that he was actually teaching, his disciples, and also a big crowd was following him. "And as he drew near to the gate of the town, behold, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. And a considerable crowd from the town was with her. And when Jesus saw her, he had compassion on her and said, 'Do not weep.' Then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. And he said, 'Young man, I say to you, arise.' And the dead man sat up and began to speak, and Jesus gave him to his mother. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God, saying, 'A great prophet has arisen among us, and God has visited his people.' And this report about him spread throughout the whole of Judea and all the surrounding country." And if you put yourself into the story and understand the cultural context of the time, it really helps. And so, you have Jesus, he's starting his ministry. His ministry is marked by acts of compassion. He's healing people. In this account, he actually raises somebody from the dead. Yeah. He is delivering people from demonic oppression. He's doing so many things. And so big crowds are following him because they're really fascinated and interested in what he's doing. And they're still trying to figure him out. Who is this man? And he's a rabbi, but, how does he get this authority and this power? And so he's traveling with a little crowd, and a crowd. And then here he comes to the gate of this town, and they're bringing out a dead body. And in the cultural context, this would be not in our Western context, we often think, well, funeral processions would be quiet and sacred and very, still. But no, in that culture of antiquity, you hired professional mourners, to come out with you, and they would be paid to weep and to wail, and there would be musicians, and there would be a big commotion to let everybody know somebody's died.
It's very loud.
It's very loud. It's very, colorful, and you have all this noise going on, and then you've got the weeping and the wailing, and then you have this woman who's already a widow. So she's already lost her husband, and this is her only son. Yeah. And these two groups all of a sudden encounter each other. And Jesus stops, and he goes over to the people that are carrying the dead body on kind of like a couch-like structure. It's not a closed casket like we would think of. It's not closed at all. This guy is laying on some kind of not like a stretcher or a couch. And he comes over and he speaks to that young man. He says, "I say to you, get up." And the guy, the dead young man sits up and he's alive. And Jesus gives him back to his mother. And, it doesn't describe like how she reacted, but you can only imagine the amazement, the tears of joy that her son is alive again. I mean, unbelievable.
Yes.
How could she ever even imagine or expect something like that would ever happen for her? And the thing that caught me about the story is the kindness of Jesus to see a widow.
Yes.
And in that time, a widow, just like today, a widow would have lost, a lot of her income source. Her husband's gone, and then her son would be expected to take care of her, and now he's gone. How is she going to survive? How's she going to live? What's going to happen to her? All these questions that often we think about in our own lives. Yes. What's going to happen to me now? Something bad has happened. I've lost a loved one, or I've got a bad diagnosis, or I lost my job, or I'm getting a divorce. I don't know what's going to happen to me. You can only imagine all the things running through this woman's mind. And Jesus stops and he takes time to pay attention to this woman, and he raises her son from the dead. I mean, that's unbelievable.
It is. It is. And this story, it catches me. I think the thing that grabs me the most, we think about Jesus he's God in the flesh. We've read in Exodus, he says, I am compassionate. And the piece that catches me the most in the story is in verse 13, it says, and when the Lord saw her, she didn't ask him. She didn't even know he was there. She didn't know to ask him. And here these groups converge, like you're saying, it's very loud. There's all this activity. There's all these people around the funeral procession, around him. And in the middle of that, he looks and he sees her, and it's not just an outside. Like he sees, like what you're talking about, he sees her, and he sees what this means for her life, what this is going to mean for the rest of her life, the depth of her sorrow. And she doesn't say anything, but he is compassionate.
Yes.
And he is moved because of who he is to come over and do something that was never even asked of him. He's not doing it because it was asked. He's doing it because it's who he is. Exactly right.
And that's what we're talking about in this whole series. Who is this God?
Yeah.
And he has many attributes. I mean, you could make a list. If you make a list of all the attributes of God, this series will go on for years.
Yes, it will.
Because there is so much to him.
Yes.
But he actually identifies this as one of his characteristics when Moses says, "Who are you?"
Yes.
And the Lord, this is in the Old Testament on Mount Sinai, and the Lord says, I am gracious, I am compassionate. This is who I am. And then, of course, when Jesus comes, Jesus is God in the flesh, and everything he's doing is mirroring back who the Father is. And so this God, in the person of Jesus, who has come near, he's come to planet Earth, he's come to live here and to experience everything that we experience, yet without sin. He is showing who the Father is.
Yes.
So it is truly amazing. And so you see the unpacking of God's nature and character in the life of Jesus as he is going around interacting with people. And the other thing I listened to in this sermon that really stood out to me, by the way, the sermon was by a theologian named R.C. Sproul, who has gone on to be with the Lord, but such a great Bible teacher. But he was saying, how did Luke decide to pick this story? I mean, because Jesus did so many things. All we have is a selection of stories in the Bible. At the end of John, at the very last verse of John, he says, if everything that Jesus did was recorded, there wouldn't be enough books in the world to contain all the stories. So how did they pick which ones to include in the Gospels?
Yes.
I have never thought about that before.
Yeah.
But it's true. We're just reading a small selection.
A very, very small selection. For whatever reason, on Luke's heart, this one was one he was like, I have to tell this story.
Exactly right.
Yes.
So, if you think about the library of God's actions and attributes, the Bible is just a small
Yes.
collection, which means it's even greater than what we could even imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But this one caught his eye. This one said, like you said, he said, I have to include this one. And what a good one to include, because every human being can relate to this.
Oh, yeah.
Every single person. You don't go through this life without encountering many difficulties, things that you never expected, things that you didn't know how to respond. You didn't know what was going to happen. All of a sudden you have this, you really sense a deep need, a need for comfort, a need for someone who loves you deeply, who sees you, who cares. Yeah. And often we don't, often think that God is like that, but he is like that. He has named himself, and he has proven that he's like that by stories like this.
Yes.
And he's still active and engaged in our lives today. This is not just only a historical account. This is, he's alive today, and he's the compassionate God today.
He is, and I know you and I have both been reading lately this John Mark Comer book, that God Has a Name. And one of the things that's caught me in there is he talks about when we stop thinking about the fact that in our world we have God, this spiritual being that is the God of all gods. But there's also these other spiritual beings that have a will, that are at work in our world, and we don't talk about them as much, and we don't think about them as much, even though now it is kind of coming out. We were talking about recently that we're getting some more TV and media and things that are starting to kind of talk about the demonic. That's a real thing. And so they have a will, and then there's human beings that have a will. And, John Mark Comer makes this statement in the book that I really have been thinking about and I agree with, where he says, when you remove the fact that those two groups have a will, we attribute the evil and everything bad that happens to God.
Exactly right.
And why does that come into my mind as we're talking about the story? It could be very easy as this widow and a lot of the people in the story to think, oh my goodness, like this is the thinking of this day and age. How can God be good if he would let something like that happen? How could he be a good God and attribute that to who he is? And with all of us in our circumstances, we can be walking through things and be struggling to think about, this is who God is. God is compassionate despite my circumstance, despite my loss or my hardship or my suffering. This is true. And he is a compassionate God.
Yes.
And it's true. And we see that in this story, that she had this horrible nightmare playing out in her life. I mean, this is like one of the worst things that could happen. Probably worse to her than her dying herself. I mean, I can't think of anything that would probably be more excruciating for this widow than to lose your only son, and you're already a widow. And so we could say, oh my goodness, like how could a good God let that happen? Well, evil is in the world. Bad things do happen. People do die. Awful stuff takes place. And
God is compassionate.
God is compassionate.
Yes.
And he is so moved for her. And then he is so moved for you, for me.
Yes.
And sometimes I think it's good to sort of draw that into our world and think about, how have we seen that? Do any stories come to mind for you?
Yes. I mean, I think what you just said is so very important in that, God, there's so many facets to God.
Yes.
And God, one of the things that's amazing is in his compassion and in his goodness, he still respects our will.
Yes, he does.
And he does not, intervene many times because, he has not made us to be robots. He's made us to be human beings who choose to love him,
Yes.
And we don't have to. It's an invitation to love him. But if we don't want to love him, we don't want to follow him, he will respect that. But he remains constant, and so his nature and character, they stay the same.
Yes.
But when I was reading this story and I was thinking about, my own mother, and, she became a widow in 2010. And I will never forget that, when my father died and I went down to Florida where they lived, and I began to go through all of the bills and look at what would my mother have to live on now that my father was gone. And I remember sitting at the dining room table with a calculator, crunching the numbers, like, oh my gosh, how is it going to be? How is she going to be able to make it? Because, she went from two incomes to one income. My father had a little pension. Now it was gone. I was so overwhelmed that I just went out for a walk, and I went to in nearby to where I could be by myself. And I just went outside, and all I said was, Jesus, I don't have many words to say. All I can say is, would you please be merciful to my mother? Because I don't see how it's going to work. I don't see how she's going to be able to make it. That's all I said. And I went back and I crunched the numbers some more. And then I watched. And I went back to North Carolina where I live, and I want to see, well, Lord, how is this going to all play out? And Laura-Catherine, that was 14 years ago. And over that 14 years, I have seen nothing but the faithfulness and compassion of God towards my mother. One miracle after another where, I found housing for her in North Carolina that was affordable. The Lord made a way for my mom to move here. He has, made a way for her financially all along the way through many different sources. Through family help, but also through others, through things that we hadn't expected. He has been faithful. And I've thought about it so many times, like, Lord, you've been so compassionate to my mother. And even now, she's still alive. She's getting ready to turn 94. And I'm thinking, but Lord, how is it going to be possible? And he goes, Camille, look back. Over the last 14 years, I have always taken care of your mother, and I will always take care of your mother. Yeah. He is a good God. He is compassionate. And I have seen that, and it has meant so much to me to see it in action towards her as a widow. Yeah. And there are, and it makes me also think about, how do we show compassion, to other people? How is God calling us? A lot of times he's calling us to open our eyes and see, who are these people out there that need compassion? Yeah. The widows, the orphans, the single moms, people who are walking with loved ones with illnesses, they're caretakers, people that have lost their jobs, people that are, struggling to make ends meet. There are just so many, and you don't know who these people are. Yeah. You could be at the Walmart just doing your daily shopping. You don't know who's walking by you and what might be going on in their lives. But to just have, say, Lord, help me be compassionate. Help me see. Help me not to be so abrupt. Help me not to be so irritated. Lord, change me. Help me to have eyes to see. And when I encounter someone and I recognize that they have a need, help me to show them compassion, because that's who you are.
Yeah, it is so who he is, and it's so beautiful, like the faithfulness you're talking about there. Him staying the same. I am compassionate. And here you've seen that with your mom. And there's two other pieces in the story it might be neat to highlight, as we're talking about this. And because that's who God is, you walked out from that time at that dining room table and you appealed to the God of compassion. If you had not known him and you thought of him as being different, mean, hard-hearted, distant and far off, you wouldn't have done that. You would have worried maybe, you would have walked out and stressed out, you would have watched something on TV to try to feel a little better, but you would not have gone out and been raw with God and just appealed to who he was. And it's like, and you have seen his compassion in your mom. Another piece that catches me is walking with your mom in this place. You've come to know more of the compassion of God by watching his compassion for your mom. You know, and sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to go maybe do this good deed for this person, like you're mentioning, like, Lord, open our eyes, these people. And we think, well, let me help them. But it's through helping people and loving them that we come to know the Lord like so much more deeply and richly ourselves. And now, I mean, 14 years ago, the level of knowing his compassion is so much higher for your mom, for you experientially, which I know you and I get so passionate about. Like, let's not leave the Bible in the Bible.
Exactly,
he wants
right.
to be here in our life.
It's so true. It's what you said is how you unpacked it is really beautiful because, we always have choices to make.
Yes.
And that's the way that God set the world up like that. We have choices, you know, and, if we look at God as the mean, uncaring, distant God, then, it's easy to become bitter. Like, God, why'd you allow that to happen? Why'd you do that to my mother? And so it's, you have choices, which things are we going to believe about God? And that affects how we respond to God and how we appeal to him. And so I would just, say, if there's anyone out there listening to this today and you find yourself in a desperate situation, you've lost a loved one, you've lost a job, you've gotten a devastating diagnosis, you don't know what's going to happen, you're afraid. Cry out to Jesus, to the compassionate God who really loves you and sees you and cares about you, and ask him for his help.
Yes.
Because he's there and he does care, and he will listen and he will respond to you.
It's I think it's a beautiful way to end. I think it's a beautiful way because it's so true. And I would just really encourage you to hear, what Camille just shared and to take that in your own life. Where do you need that God in your current life circumstances, maybe for people around you who you know and you love, maybe for people around you that you really don't know them that well, but your heart is moved for their circumstance. He is the God of compassion.
Amen.
And he is with you, and he wants to be there with you. And so we encourage you to do like Camille did. Go engage with him. Go talk with him. Have a really blessed next few weeks. Yes. We look forward to being with you next time.
Take good care.